The night air over the Moonfire Kingdom smelled of smoke and pine, and Wren Ashford had grown used to both. She knelt in the dirt behind the border camp, her hands pressed against a wounded soldier's side, whispering words that were not quite prayers and not quite medicine, but something in between that only healers like her understood. Around her, the sounds of battle had faded into the low groans of the injured and the crackle of dying torches. She did not know, in that moment, that her life was about to change forever. Wren was 24 years old, born in the outer territories where the soil was poor, and the wolves who lived there were often forgotten by the kingdom's nobility. She had no titles, no family name that mattered in court, and no wealth beyond the herbs she carried in a worn leather satchel. What she did have was a gift, an unusual, almost sacred talent for healing that had saved more lives in the border wars than any physician trained in the royal city. It was this gift that had brought her, 3 days earlier, to the side of a dying king. Alpha King Draven Nightshade had been struck during an ambush near the eastern ridge, his side torn open by a blade laced with wolfsbane, a poison that could kill even the strongest of their kind. His own healers had given up. It was Wren, traveling through the camp with a group of refugees, who had pushed past the guards, knelt beside him, and worked through the night to draw the poison from his blood. When he opened his eyes at dawn, the first thing he saw was her face, pale with exhaustion, streaked with dirt, and utterly unconcerned with who he was. "You saved my life," he had said, his voice hoarse. "I saved a life," she had corrected him. "Yours happened to be attached to it." He had laughed then, a real laugh, the kind his court rarely heard from him. And something in his chest, something ancient and instinctive, tied to the deepest parts of his wolf, had recognized her. The bond scent, the mark that told an alpha he had found the one meant to stand beside him. Draven was not a king who believed in delaying what mattered. 3 days later, standing before his full court in the great hall of Moonfire Palace, he did something no one expected. He named Wren Ashford his intended queen. The hall fell into stunned silence, and then into a storm of whispers. Nobles turned to look at the woman standing near the back of the room, still in her traveling clothes, her hands still faintly stained with herbs. She did not look like a queen. She did not act like one either. "I am honored," Wren said slowly, once she found her voice, "that your majesty values what I did. But I cannot accept this." The whispers turned to gasps. Draven stepped down from his dais, closing the distance between them. "Wren, you offer me a crown because I saved your life," she said, quiet but steady, her eyes never leaving his. "That is gratitude, my king. It is not love, and it is not respect. I will not be given a throne like a payment for services rendered. I am not a debt you owe." The court erupted into murmurs of disbelief. No one refused an alpha king. No one, especially not a healer from the outer territories, dared to speak to him with such bluntness in front of his entire nobility. But Wren was not finished. "If I ever wear a crown," she said, "it will be because someone believes I deserve it, not because they feel they must repay me. Until then, your majesty, I am simply glad you are alive." She bowed, once, respectfully, and walked out of the great hall, leaving behind a king who had never in his life been refused anything, and a court that did not know whether to be scandalized or strangely moved. Draven did not chase after her. He stood in the silence she left behind, his jaw tight, his pride bruised. But beneath that, something else stirred. Respect. He had offered her a crown as thanks, and she had shown him, in front of everyone, that she wanted to be seen as more than a convenient answer to his gratitude. It was the first time in years that anyone had told him no. In the weeks that followed, Wren returned to her work. She traveled between the outer villages and the war-torn borderlands, healing soldiers, tending to refugee children, and setting broken bones in huts that had no proper light. She did not attend court. She did not seek out the king. If anything, she seemed determined to prove that her refusal had nothing to do with waiting for him to ask again. But she was being watched. The Council of Royal Elders, 5 ancient wolves whose age stretched back further than any living memory, whose magic bound the kingdom's laws and its succession, rarely concerned themselves with the personal affairs of a king. They convened only for matters of true importance: war, famine, the death of a monarch without an heir. They did not attend to matters of the heart. And yet, one by one, they began to hear of her. They heard of the healer who had walked 12 miles through a snowstorm to reach a dying child in a village with no name on any map. They heard of the woman who had refused payment from a grieving widow, saying the woman's coin was needed more for her children's bread than for gratitude. They heard, too, of the day a group of soldiers, drunk and cruel, had cornered a young refugee girl near the camp gates, and how Ren, unarmed and furious, had stood between them and the child and refused to move until the soldiers backed down, shamed into silence by a woman half their size and twice their courage. The eldest of the elders, a silver-eyed woman named Marin, who had outlived 12 kings, began to take a quiet interest. Meanwhile, in the royal city, the nobility was not idle. Several noble daughters had long expected to be named queen themselves, and Ren's refusal had done little to end their ambitions. If anything, it had convinced them the throne was still within reach. Among them was Lady Isolde Ravenswood, a cunning noblewoman whose family had waited 3 generations for a crown, and who was not about to let a healer from nowhere stand in her way, refusal or not. Isolde began to spread quiet rumors that Ren's refusal had been a performance, a clever manipulation meant to make the king want her more, that a woman of no birth could never be trusted near the throne, that her healing was suspicious, perhaps even unnatural. When rumors failed to work, for Draven, stubborn in his own way, refused to believe a word against her, Isolde grew desperate. She orchestrated an attack on a border village under Ren's protection, timed so that it would appear Ren had failed to warn the soldiers in time, making her look either incompetent or, worse, complicit with the raiders. But Isolde underestimated her. Ren, sensing something wrong in the days before the attack, a change in the wind, rumors from traveling merchants, an unfamiliar pattern in the raiders' movements, had already begun quietly preparing the village. When the attackers came, they found the villagers ready, the wounded tended before they even fell, and Ren herself standing at the front lines, not as a soldier, but as the calm center that held the chaos together. More than that, she found the trail that led back to Isolde, a discarded letter, a bribed guard, who broke under the weight of his own guilt, and confessed everything once Ren treated his infected wound, and spoke to him not with threats, but with quiet kindness. When the truth came out, it came out fully. Isolde's plot exposed before the entire court, her noble family disgraced, and dozens of villagers alive because a woman with no crown had done what an army might have failed to do. Ren did not celebrate. She did not gloat. She simply returned to her work, tending to the wounded from the very attack meant to destroy her. It was this, more than anything, that convinced the Council of Royal Elders to act. They had not called an emergency rite in over 200 years. The last time had been to settle a war of succession that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. This time, the reason was different, but to the elders, no less important. Marin, the eldest, stood before the other 4 in the sacred chamber beneath the palace, where the kingdom's oldest magic still hummed faintly in the stone walls. "The throne is not merely a matter of blood or love," she said. "It is a matter of who the kingdom needs. And I have not seen a woman like this in all my centuries of watching kings rise and fall." The other elders agreed, one after another, until the decision was made. Word spread through Moonfire Palace like wildfire. The Council of Royal Elders had summoned Ren Ashford to the Great Hall. Not the king, not the nobility, but the elders themselves, whose word on succession was older and stronger than any monarch's decree. Ren arrived not knowing what to expect, still dressed simply, her satchel of herbs slung over her shoulder out of habit, as though she might be called away to heal someone at any moment. The hall was full, nobles, soldiers, servants, all crowded to witness what none of them had seen in living memory. Draven stood near his throne, his expression unreadable, though his eyes followed her the moment she entered. Marin stepped forward first. She did not speak to the court. She spoke directly to Ren. "Child," she said, "we have watched you these past weeks, though you did not know it. We have seen you heal the friendless. We have seen you protect the powerless. We have seen you refuse a crown you were not ready to accept, and earn one you never asked for." One by one, The 5 elders knelt before her, an act that had not been performed for any soul, king or commoner, in over 2 centuries. The court gasped, as each elder lowered themselves to the marble floor, their ancient heads bowed before a healer from the outer territories. "We do not choose you because the king wills it," Marin said, rising slowly. "We choose you because the kingdom itself is better for your presence in it. Integrity cannot be bought, courage cannot be commanded, and a true queen is not simply chosen, she is recognized." Ren stood frozen, her heart pounding, unable to fully understand what was happening, even as it happened around her. Then Draven stepped down from his throne. He did not command her, and he did not remind her of the bond between them, or the debt he had once tried to repay with a crown. Instead, he knelt before her as well, not as a king claiming what was his, but as a man asking, humbly, to be chosen in return. "I offered you a crown once, out of gratitude," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "I was wrong to think that was enough. I am not asking you to be my queen because I owe you my life. I am asking because somewhere between that night and this one, I fell in love with the woman who refused me, and I would rather spend the rest of my life earning your trust than ruling a kingdom without you in it." Tears gathered in Ren's eyes, though she did not let them fall. She looked around the hall, at the elders who had knelt for her, at the nobles who now watched her with something like awe instead of scorn, and finally at the king who knelt before her, offering not a crown born of debt, but a partnership born of respect. "This time," she said softly, "it is not a debt, it is a choice." She reached out and helped him rise, and together they turned to face the court, not as a king and the woman he had saved, but as 2 equals who had earned each other, in their own ways, through their own trials. The crown that was placed on Ren's head that day was heavier than she expected, but she did not feel burdened by it. She felt, for the first time in her life, truly seen, not for what she could give others, not for her healing hands or her quiet sacrifices, but for who she was, underneath all of it. The kingdom whispered of her for years afterward, not as the healer who had refused a king, but as the queen the elders themselves had chosen, a woman who had proven that true worth could never be forced, bought, or demanded. It could only be recognized. And on the palace balcony that evening, as the sun set golden over the Moonfire Kingdom, Ren stood beside Draven, not as a prize he had won, but as the queen the entire realm had come to know, a queen who had never once asked for a crown, and who had been given one anyway, because she had earned it with every quiet, unseen act of courage along the way.